Hi, my name is Winsley, and welcome to my video on the weakest culture in Age of Wonders 4 after the Watcher update. I wanted to thank Nurgle's Herald on Discord here. He has a YouTube channel, Walker, uh, and Emily. I think W/E plays games. He pointed out that basically a lot of people in this thread were saying that Dark is the weakest culture in my Discord, and I think that led to a really interesting discussion on Reddit and my Discord. Basically, Dark is one of some people's favorite cultures because it gives a lot of knowledge, and that's one of the most important resources in Age of Wonders 4. If you're lacking on knowledge, it's pretty hard to compete with people who get access to those nice toys a little bit earlier in the game. But there's also some interesting comparisons here between some of the other things. I think what's really great about Age of Wonders 4 is that this is actually very debatable. I don't think there is a very clear like best culture slash weakest culture, and that makes the game really fun and interesting to come back to. So before we move over to my Discord, I want to point out a few things about the thread here on Reddit. It seems like the author was pretty surprised that a lot of people were saying dark is weak, and it seems that some people were mistaking dark culture for the shadow affinity. And while the dark culture does give the shadow affinity, there's a pretty big distinction between like the Empire upgrades you get from Shadow Affinity and the tier 3 unit you get from Dark Culture, as well as the province improvements and buildings that improve your general knowledge. If we, for example, if we go over to this save, we can see that this city can build this special city structure, which gives extra knowledge and gold. It replaces one of the other buildings that the other cultures get access to. A lot of these buildings will give you like a little bit of food, a little bit of mana, or a little bit of research, but the culture ones will give you like a mixture of the base resource and something else that the culture is generally pretty good at. Dark culture is better at knowledge, so it basically takes the gold building and turns it into a little bit of knowledge income. There's also a really nice special building which you get access to as dark culture. I think buildings are this tab. If we go to our special improvements, you get access to this one. Requires this city to be tier 2, so that's why I don't have access to it in the city just yet. But basically, when you have a city that's got a lot of quarries or mines, this is a really nice improvement for getting a lot of draft, allowing you to build your units very quickly. And that's quite nice when you compare it to what other cultures get access to. I also really like the Sunshine. This one gives a lot of knowledge. You do have to have research posts around a Sunshine to get the most out of it, but if you're able to scout out enough conduits, or rather mana nodes that you can turn into a conduit or a research post, you can get a lot of research very quickly using this building. I think this building, along with the focus on knowledge and a couple other really interesting mechanics in combat, has led to high culture being pretty popular. I believe it was the most popular in the poll that we were just looking at, or it had the least votes for weakest. They did kind of change some of the things with the way Awakening works, but I think in general that Awaken mechanic is easier to use than the Dark Culture's focus on weakening foes and then using like Cull of the Weak to get a lot of damage on them. If we compare this to like the Forest of Stakes, that one's not bad. It needs foresters to get extra draft. It gives you just a little bit of everything, which it can help you get over some of the thresholds, like build units a little bit faster, or build buildings a little bit faster, grow your cities a little bit faster. But I find that it's a little bit less focused, and therefore, I don't know, less interesting. I think if you focus on one type of resource, that really lets you do some interesting things with that resource, like the levy camp. This can help your cities grow very, very quickly. If you have a lot of farms and then you attach a levy camp around that, a feudal player can get cities built very large and fairly quickly. Mystic Abbey is not bad because you get mana and knowledge, but I'm just generally not a big fan of how squishy mystics are and how they rely so much on magic damage. I think people in general really like mystics, but if you're playing in a game where spelljammers aren't banned, they run into some pretty significant hurdles against players who know, okay, I'm going to need a spelljammer against mystics, and I'm not going to want to go fight them in their cities um, unless I have a really big advantage. Right, and then there is the builder's quarter, which gives you a lot of production. Pretty good if you're trying to build up your city in a longer game, maybe less useful in a shorter game. Another thing worth noting is each of the different cultures gets a special tier 3 unit, and the dark cultures, the Dark Knight is a little bit trickier to use efficiently as some of the others. I really like the Awakeners and the High Culture because they're generally pretty easy to get their attacks to do a lot of damage. Doing an AoE means you can hit a lot of units from relatively far away, and then Awakening can make it so that your other units can be more efficient than they are without the awakening. Spirit Bolts is nice, but it's not the main selling point of this unit. When he's get and this guy gets awakened, he gets Radiant Light, making it so that they have a chance of inflicting distracted, which is a pretty big modifier, making it so that every attack on that unit would do a lot of extra damage. I think it's 25% for regular flanking, and then yeah, you can get other boosts to your flanking damage if you wanted to. But yeah, going back to the dark culture, this guy has a charge attack, which means you have to travel a certain number of hexes. I think it's 3 to get the most damage. Yeah, it says up to 3 hexes. Um, you can get plus 60% on this attack, making it a pretty big single strike attack, and your enemy kind of has to like set it up in a way that um, you can take advantage of this. And if you're playing against certain players, they're just going to stand closer to your Dark Knights or um, out of range. If you get closer, you might be at risk of the Dark Surge, but maybe they used their Dark Surge last turn, and that gives you an opportunity to get actually closer to you, these units to avoid the charge strike or to make it harder for them to use their charge strike. But in general, I think this is a very strong unit because of the AoE. It reminds me of the AoE on the Awakener, but this one does frost damage, and I think that's a damage channel that can be pretty helpful against a lot of different unit types. If we wanted to, we could look at like the Industrious Bastion, which I'm a pretty big fan of. Uh, right here, the Bastion can make it so other guys get more defense, and um, then bolstered defense makes it so that units are harder to kill. The Steel Shaper combined with a dragon is a very, very strong combination. I know some people who think Industrious is easily the strongest culture in the game when you play it right. If you take like Underground Start and plays a dragon and you take Industrious, you can get a lot of items from excavating the ground and get a lot of passive income and just have a really nice military unit from the very beginning of the game. I think that dragons are very strong at rushing opponents. At first I didn't think they were because they need a little bit of experience before they become as good as they can be, but honestly they're amazing units. They got enough defense and enough damage that they can really shift fights in early, mid, and late game. The If you've got enough defense on them, they're they're very, very tricky to deal with. But yeah, all of these guys have a unique tier 3. This one is the Spellbreaker, which is a very nice unit. Removes the uh, loses all positive status effects here, and I think this one, yeah, just does a lot of damage. I thought this was a purge to negative status effects too. Loses all positive status effects, and maybe I'm thinking of a different unit for this one. But all in all, not a bad unit. Having an AoE that can get rid of things like strengthened on enemies or regeneration on enemies or their bolstered defense or bolstered resistance, that could make it so you can actually take out a dragon a lot more easily. There's of course Barbarian, which has our favorite, the Berserker, or at least my least favorite to play against the AI with because they just spam out this unit, and he's got Steadfast on him, I believe. Berserker's Rage, yeah, when he gets low on HP, he goes into this like crazy killing mode. But I don't think that really makes up for the lack of research that barbarians get. If we wanted to, we could look at uh, their options at the beginning, and they basically focus on, I think, draft and food production at the cost of knowledge. So I don't know. I would probably rank Barbarian a little bit lower than other people, but the Ritual of Alacrity, being able to heal and get movement, is very nice, specifically for clearing and moving around the map. If you combine that with a little bit of Materium Affinity, you can get a lot of outposts across the map that you can use to heal your guys up. Um, but yeah, we've basically looked at them all. Think we didn't look at the knights. Knight's okay. He's got a charge thing. I find him probably like the least interesting out of all of the uh, tier 3 units, but I think he's got a place. He's mounted, and I think that kind of leans into what the feudal guys are good at. So I just hopped over to Discord to highlight a discussion between Nurgle and Endag. Endag said at one point that he doesn't count feudal as a culture, so dark is probably the weakest. Which in my mind, he's saying that feudal isn't worth playing. It is the weakest, but if you want to consider the viable cultures, then dark is probably the weakest. And if we look here, he gives his reasons. He says if you want the T1 Shadow perk, you can get the Shadow Tome. You don't need the affinity to come from the Dark culture. When you're picking your culture, you want to pick something that matches the theme of what you're trying to accomplish. And Industrious does research really well, so good in long games. Barbarians do map clearing best, so great in short games. High can be really aggressive in small maps. The magic damage and awakening allows you to get through a lot of defense, so that allows you to attack other people before they can get resistance up. Mystic and Dark are research based, but Industrious does it a little bit better. I haven't tested that, but I trust his instincts on that. I think that Industrious being better at building would let you get those research buildings up and running, and then province improvements a little bit faster. And then I think if you combine that with like the a little bit of astral affinity to get adaptive research, that can let you get the research buildings up pretty quickly, and you can build a lot of them. 100% of the best units are in tomes according to Endex, so your culture doesn't matter that much. And the fact that Industrious has some pretty bad units doesn't matter because of that. And you can like take advantage of their buildings and like their hero skills and other nice things like that. I think they have some pretty good hero skills. It's an important factor to consider. So, one more thing I wanted to point out was I don't really understand why people are saying Shadow Affinity is bad. It may be because some of the later things in the Shadow Affinity tree are less interesting than other ones, but they have what I would argue is probably the best first Empire skill, the one that gives you a little bit of research when you kill enemy heroes. Yeah, it's 150 research per hero defeated in combat. That can be used against independent cities to get a lot of knowledge very quickly. When you're getting like 100 research a turn, getting 2 or 3 turns of research from one fight is massive. It's very game changing. And of course, if you use it against another ruler, another player in the game, that's going to mean a lot of knowledge too. So if we go back to here, I could give my own ranking of weakest to strongest. I particularly don't like the feudal. I think that's probably my weakest. And then I don't use mystic a lot, although I do see a lot of potential for power there. It's just not my favorite play style. And then after that, I would probably rank barbarian or dark next. I know based on the things I've been reading, I should probably value dark more, but I find the playstyle a little bit tricky. Barbarian's just a little bit easier for me. So yeah, this I'd probably go with dark, followed by barbarian, and then after that, that leaves us with industrious and high, my two favorites. And it really depends on the map, which one I would prefer to take. But I think generally speaking, Industrious is just slightly better. It's easier to get things going, unless like maybe there's no underground or you've banned dragons and you're playing with some like alternative rules to give make the game slightly more interesting. I think like coming up with different settings to play on is fun. Like we've been discussing just doing auto combats, no manual combats in a fight, and also like less heroes because heroes are just very, very powerful. The Dark Ritual ability is, I think, the best signature skill in the game. So if you get that, you're off to a good start. You get a good advantage. But yeah, but I think generally speaking, rankings like this are a lot less useful than detailed analysis and conversations and experience playing the game. I think, these are gonna be it's very situational. Depending on the map you're playing on, some cultures may be better than others. If you're playing on a map with mountains, Industrious is going to be a lot better because you can clear out those mountains and get items and resources out of them. Um, but like I said earlier, I think the fact that this is kind of debatable and people have very strong opinions about one culture and that differs from other people who've got just as much experience, I think lends itself to replayability in Age of Wonders 4. And I'm really excited to see how the game changes. Um, Once we start getting the next few DLCs and the updates that are coming out alongside them, I am quite excited for the item forge. I think that's going to really make heroes a little bit more interesting, although they're very good already as is. I do want to see them nerfed a little bit. I'm excited to see, how the item forge mechanic interacts with them and uh, all the other neat things that are probably coming along with it. So yeah, I'll see you around. Have a good one.